I
Sure.
won't even take that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Chair. How many people in the room have heard of Gandhiji? Please raise your hands.
Oh.
All right.
Ask the other way, who has not heard?
Since and how many people? Yeah, how many people know the link between Gandhiji and FICCI? Please raise your hands. Yeah. So the answer is very simple. In 1926-27, there were no Indian associations. Business had British business associations. So Gandhiji actually suggested to leading Indian industrialists, saying, where is the Indian industry representation? That's how we were founded in 1927. Thank you, sir. And that's how Gandhiji was our chief guest in our 4th annual general meeting in 1931, slightly before most of us were born. So from the 4th AGM in 1931 to the 96th AGM in 10 days in Vigyan Bhavan, that is the story of FICCI. We represent 250,000 businesses across India. The reason why I mention this is, and as Chair very graciously suggested, that I've had experience 17 years in the IAS and 19 years in the private sector. The big difference between the government and the private sector is that the private sector is all about cash flow. Whether we like it or not, if cash flow will not happen, the private sector will not do it. And the way to get cash flow or behavioral tweaks in the private sector is to have incentives and disincentives. And I strongly recommend that whatever be the outcome of our conference, we build in those incentives and disincentives so that most economic activity and therefore most emissions will be the result of private sector activity. What are the incentives and what are the disincentives for the private sector that we are planning? That's my first big sort of suggestion for the conference going forward. Dignitaries in the dais and dignitaries, quite a few in the audience. Those of us from India would know that when we air condition our houses or heat our houses, we typically only air condition the room that we are sleeping in or sitting in. We do not air condition the entire home at once. This simple thing is lifestyle for economy. If only the rich world did exactly the same thing, instead of heating your entire home or cooling your entire home, just heat or cool the room that you're in. Automatically the per capita emissions in the rich world would drop. This is such a simple solution. I'm sure that during the course of the conference this has been discussed. But this morning I was sitting with my team who's going to COP28 in Dubai, starting in a few days. And I said, what are the key messages that the Indian delegation wants to take there? Key message number one is that we are perhaps the only country who has lived up to their commitments of Paris. In fact, achieved some of them before time. We are the only country where 2440 times is the increase in solar power generation that has happened in the last 10-15 years. And we are the only country who has such a large number of poor people. So whenever people talk about emissions, the logical way to look at it is per capita emissions. My last point really is focus is important. And we have seen this diffusion of focus or dilution of focus from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. We had very, very clear focused goals in the Millennium Development Goals. We quite frankly, when everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. And therefore, may I suggest one particular priority? And that priority is cities. Those of us from India grew up in a city which was half its size when they were born than it is today. Those of us who grew up in India have seen our cities double in size since you were born. Yes or no? Yes? More than double. And in the next 20 years, I'm very confident that they will double from their current size. So cities are going to be the leading contributor of economic growth. They're also going to be the leading contributor of emissions. How do we make this path from a 20 million population Delhi to a 40 and 50 million population Delhi in a sustainable fashion? Because that is where our lifestyle is really going to make a difference. And in many ways, the rich world has already achieved this transition from rural to urban. Right? So in 1800 or in 1700, most of the US was rural. In 2023, most of it is urban. We will achieve this transition not only in India, but in Asia and in Africa. So if there is one focus that all of you experts who know much more about this topic than me can work on incentives and disincentives, it is how to get sustainable urban development. If this conference had been happening in a large global city, 90% of us would have come by public transport. And I know that not very many people have come by metro to this conference. How do we design our cities? How do we work towards sustainable development of our cities in Addis Ababa, in Lagos, in Kuala Lumpur, in India? I don't know whether that has been talked about enough. But when we talk about lifestyle for global change and the LiFE economy, I would only recommend incentives and disincentives for the private sector and a focus on sustainable urban practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pathak. That was a good information that you gave about Mahatma Gandhi. In fact, the other thing that he mentioned was the emphasis, as you very rightly said, the focus not on cities but on villages. So we talk about creating more smart cities. So I think it's time we start thinking in terms of making smart villages. So, or maybe if a village becomes too smart, it becomes another smart city. I think that's a subject for another conference very soon. But this idea of per capita emission also is good, which you suggested that we will start thinking of that. As RIS, we do a lot of research and we get new items for research. And I would recommend Professor Tadas to take note of it so that this becomes another issue to scale differences. I'll now come to Mr. Michael. He has come all the way from the US, of course, not directly now. He is the Assistant Administrator of Bureau for Asia. And again, his experience and expertise in foreign relations. He was the Senate Democratic Staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And he has also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia and alumni of London School of Economics, if I am not mistaken, right? Oh, good combination, London School of Economics and Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security. So I think we should listen to you more carefully, not only on economics but also on strategic subjects. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you all for allowing me to join you for this closing session of the Global LiFE Summit. Really, very happy to be able to be here and to learn from you all about what it is that we together need to be doing as we think about how to tackle the challenges of climate change and sustainable development. Let me start, though, by offering my congratulations to India for an extraordinarily successful G20 presidency and a unanimous leaders' declaration. India demonstrated great leadership through its focus on accelerating progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, global food security, global health, data for development, and gender equity and women-led development. The G20 New Delhi Leaders Declaration features a first-ever Green Development Pact, which President Biden and other G20 leaders committed to pursue low-carbon emissions, climate resilience, environmentally sustainable development pathways, and to champion an integrated and inclusive approach to all of these challenges. The leaders also committed, as you all know, to urgently accelerating collective G20 actions to address development and climate challenges, promote lifestyles for sustainable development, and to conserve biodiversity, forests, and oceans. The United States and India together both recognize that addressing sustainable consumption and production from a systems perspective is key to achieving the development, environment, and climate ambitions of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs. The urgency, the scope, the scale of the challenges that we face demand a response that is equal in its creativity, in its impact, and in its transformative nature if we're going to be successful. During their June 2023 meeting, so just a few months ago, President Biden welcomed Prime Minister Modi's Lifestyle for Environment initiative as a successful national model to address the impacts of climate change, biodiversity loss, desertification, and land degradation, and resolve to work together to implement the G20 high-level principles on lifestyles for sustainable development. Since day one of the Biden-Harris administration, climate change is and has been and remains a top priority for the United States, both domestically and globally. And President Biden has pledged to work with our Congress to seek to quadruple U.S. public climate finance by 2024, including by raising $3 billion annually for international climate adaptation. And through the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or PREPARE, the United States is working to make 500 million people around the globe more resilient to climate change this decade by expanding access to tools like early warning systems and access to drought-resilient seeds. Last year, USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, my agency, launched a climate strategy through 2030 to guide our efforts to advance climate-positive development practices across all that we do. Complementary to the discussions held at this summit, part of that strategy involves fostering, incentivizing, and nurturing the civic engagement and behavior changes necessary to guide and sustain systems change. We also seek to put our communities and individuals most affected by climate change at the heart of our efforts, including women, youth, and other underrepresented populations. Here in India, the United States has a long and productive development partnership. This is a development partnership goes back over 70 years at this point, predating, in fact, the existence of USAID. Our partnership has evolved over the years, and it matches India's trajectory and leadership on global issues, including on climate change. With India, USAID is seeking to leverage our unique programs and platforms to drive systems change, to advance inclusive development, and to harness innovation, and to elevate locally led solutions for more sustainable and impactful results. Today, we're building this partnership in new ways that match India's record on innovation and leadership and identifying solutions that can serve as models for the world in developed and developing countries alike. When it comes to climate change, for example, USAID is working with India to protect critical ecosystems, transition to renewable energy, build resilience against the impacts of climate change, and to promote the flow of capital towards climate-positive investments. We are likewise collaborating on regional energy projects, extending green power, and thereby seeking to extend economic opportunity throughout South Asia. We're supporting state forest developments to integrate climate change into their planning, and we're partnering in new areas such as plastics pollution, mitigation, and biodiversity conservation. Matching the spirit of the G20, the United States and India are leveraging our combined capacities for global good, including trilateral development partnerships to work together in third countries, harnessing the global presence that USAID is able to bring with India's innovation expertise and best practices, and to extend these best practices to countries in South Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, and around the globe. Together, we can and must do all we can to advance equitable and ambitious actions to confront the climate crisis and to move the goals of the Global LiFE Summit, as you have put it, from concept to action. Our future depends on it. And thank you again for allowing me to join you here today.
Thank you, Michael. You have really raised some of the most important points, especially the one regarding the climate change issues and finding technological solutions to climate change problems. But more importantly, I think the most important thing that you mentioned is about looking for finances, how to finance these technological innovations that countries in Asia are going to make. That's a very big issue. And when it comes to financing these issues, I think we have one of the best persons who have already done a monumental work and research on these issues is the person to my right, Andre. Andre is OECD Sherpa to G20, but more importantly, he is also the director of OECD Global Relations and Cooperation as well. And he still keeps his teaching schedules, if I'm not mistaken, very seriously. He takes it up. You're still a senior fellow of Chongqing Institute of Financial Studies in China? Yeah, of course. So he keeps his teaching schedules as important as his financial and other research matters. Very recently, OECD brought out a report on global financing of SDGs, right? Which was released by RIS, I think 2-3 months back. So I would request you to take on this issue.
Thanks so much. Let me start by giving you this, because if I'm more longer than 5 minutes, you can knock me out with this. I'm passionate about what we are doing, and so first, big thanks to RIS, to Sachin Chaturvedi, please represented here by our dear friend Gopal Krishna. So please convey our deepest thanks for the fantastic hospitality we had. Big thanks to Herod and his team, I should say, really very well done. And big thanks to all of you, because I mean, many people were, my co-panelists were quoting Mahatma Gandhi, and I mean, I can only provide a quote which was very often used, be the change you want the world you want to see in the world. And this conference is actually in this tradition, because you are at the forefront of changing a paradigm for development, a paradigm for life economies, a paradigm for lifestyles for sustainable development. And I think I'm leaving this conference richer than I came, slightly tired yesterday morning after one night in the plane. And I want to thank all of you for having contributed to that. Now, I think I'm not going to speak. I have to disappoint you, moderator, not too much about financing this time, but about how can we make this life economy concept make livable, make workable. How can we further translate the narrative? How can we further translate also the underpinning empirical, the indicators? And this is something when Amitabh Kant first mentioned to me that he wants to push this concept through the G20, the lifestyle for sustainable development, lifestyle for environment. And Herod approached me about life economy, about how kind of come to a paradigm shift in our economies, which makes them more livable, which makes them more sustainable, which makes them more human. I was telling them, listen, if you want to do this, I think we also need to try to get some numbers, some underpinning statistics, some underpinning data, in order to convince those who are not yet convinced that this is the way to go. So in a way, the OECD stands ready to contribute to the concept, to further develop with all of you the narrative. And I think actually what you did today over the last 2 days in the panels, but also with the power, with the flip charts, is a good search. And we are in a moment where we don't have all the answers yet, how we want to move forward, but it's a good search. What the OECD wants to contribute is we have our green growth indicators, our better life index, which can underpin the lifestyle for sustainable development concept. We have our knowledge exchange platform on well-being metrics, policy practices, and we recently launched what I quoted also in my intro yesterday morning, our inclusive forum on carbon mitigation approaches to have an economic sense and a social sense on what countries are doing to reach their net zero emissions, because we really need to make progress. We need to have a more honest dialogue on what countries are doing to make progress without kind of lecturing each other, but we need to bring advanced emerging economies and developing countries together there to go a bit beyond UNFCCC, not to duplicate, but to have an economic inspired conversation about it. The fourth element what we contribute is our recommendation on the social and solidarity economy, social innovation. And you rightly mentioned that we have launched a reflection process with our report on the bottlenecks to access SDG financing for developing countries. And this is something we can also continue. You want to knock the clock?
No.
I'm sorry, I'm passionate.
I just
stick to my
put up my mic.
So this is something where we believe that we need to leverage more private finance with public finance with private finance. We worked with the G20 presidencies of Indonesia and now with India on blended finance principles. We are serving as a secretariat for the global, for the Paris Finance Summit. And this is an agenda we need to work together to leverage more private finance in the game, to really move from the millions to the trillions needed for both for the SDGs and for climate. Final point from my side, or second final point I should say, I'm very pleased that we have launched the gallery project, which is actually the economic and the empirical underpinning for the LiFE economies, and this is something we have been ready to contribute from the OECD side, also with work overcoming the growing SDG financing gap, supporting developing countries in overcoming these bottlenecks, but also underpin this lifestyle for sustainable development concept with some empirical data and figures. Very final point from my side. I think we are in a very crucial moment at this time when it comes to reshaping global governance. I know that there are a number of, I feel that in this kind of multifaceted challenges in a multipolar world, we are going a bit back into a confrontational approach. The global north, the global south, the BRICS, the G7, the G77. And I sincerely believe that we need to overcome this confrontational approach. We need to kind of look for formats like this one we have here in this conference to work together. We have it we try to do this in the G20. We offer the OECD as a platform for dialogue between advanced, emerging and developing countries, and we are really serious about it to kind of do this on an equal footing basis. So whatever all of you can do in your daily life to help us with all our brains to overcome this divisive thinking and to go back to the topic of the Indian presidency, one Earth, one family, one future, and we need to work together for that. The OECD is ready and happy. Thanks a lot. Now you can.
Thank you, Andre. It was very interesting. And incidentally, I never stop if someone talks about finance. And as the American adage goes, promise me anything but give me money. So that's most important. Mr. Pathak had to leave for another meeting. In fact, he's told us that he won't be able to join us because of that meeting, but we forced him to join us, and then on a promise that you make a speech and go and don't stop or wait for lunch. So that's what he has done, I think. Yeah. I'll now have Dr. Bhatt, Dr. J.R. Bhatt, Jayavardhan Ramanlal Bhatt, who he already chaired a session, so we know about his expertise as far as ADB and World Bank is concerned. We will have Mr. Bhatt tell us about his views on this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Dignitaries on the dais and those in the audience. Meetings like this provide a common platform for learning, thinking, sharing, where we pause, we ponder, and we introspect. And it is in that spirit that we have been here for two days now. And yesterday, while we were having a closing session on the COP28 in this room, I reminded the participants that in Rig Veda there is a saying, let noble thoughts come to us from all sides. Ano bhadra krato yantu vishwataha. So it is in that spirit that we have been working, and we have been discussing, we have been learning, and we have been sharing. There are 5 questions which Chair came very strongly for discussions. One was energy for sustaining 8 billion people on earth. Today, 80% of world's energy comes from fossil fuels. Wind and solar provide only 2.4%. I am not saying this is the latest IEA report. So, that is the first question. Second question is how to handle the impacts of an adaptation to climate change, especially in an unequal world. Third had been before the conference, how can the remaining and the rapidly declining carbon budget of 500 billion ton be shared equitably for keeping the warming to 1.5 degree as envisioned as one of the 2 targets of the Paris Agreement. The fourth question was, which model of development the world should emulate? Building wealth by excessive consumption patterns or going the green and clean way? And the last but not the least was how to catch up with the development deficit and areas of development. And these 5 questions, participants kept on reminding themselves that these 5 questions before the world were with a backdrop. And the backdrop has been that there is a narrative created by those who understand how the world works, and that narrative is largely from the developed country scholars, and the narrative is that climate action is for everyone but for themselves. So the world keep on doing climate action, we will not come to terms with our lifestyles. So that is where, apart from ISA, CDRI and all that India gave the message of lifestyles for sustainable development. Having said that, Chair, the speaker before me also handed over that thing to you to cut me off whenever you would like. So, but I hope you would be kind enough and you will be little more kind to me as I speak. So, and the FICCI representative, who is not here, he brought up the question of per capita emissions. The world will say, you have too many people, too much protoplasm on earth. South Asia, 24% of humanity is with you, so your emissions must be very large. I'm saying South Asia because India included. And the report card, mind you, is out. The AR6 IPCC cycle has proved beyond doubt that not only per capita emissions, which are very, very minimal of South Asia, but cumulative historical emissions, Chair, between 1850 to 2020, they are less than 4%. Again, this report has been released by IPCC in 2022, just last year. So, many people say, India or South Asia, can you do more? Will you do more? Would you pull more than your fair share of what you have been asked to do? So, this argument has to be seen from a perspective that any self-sacrifice like India reducing emissions or South Asia reducing emissions immediately will not only deprive a large part of our people of development, but will not save the world either. Since the contribution to the problem of global warming is so minimal, whole of South Asia with 24% population, I repeat, less than 4% emissions, and India is only 3% in before a yardstick of 100. So the point remains, nations of the world must stay within their fair share of carbon budgets. This is a strategic global resource and also a strategic resource for the countries. India will use its fair share of the carbon budget responsibly. India has taken several initiatives to balance its development plans with climate change mitigation and adaptation actions. And our worldview, India's worldview, is shaped by our ancestors, where we revere the Mother Earth, and there is a beautiful shloka in the Bhumi Suktam where it says, Mata Bhumi Putro Aham Prithivyaha. Earth is my mother and we all are her children, roughly. You can never do a rendition in English, but roughly translated, that's what it means. And that is why we had this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, our worldview, that world is but one family, and promoting empathy among all life forms on earth, and that nature cannot be taken for granted. Nature protects only if she is protected, and that is also the logo that India gave at CBD to the world, and it is adopted as a logo of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Mangroves will protect if you protect mangroves. Don't take nature for granted. And the forests are revered, worshipped in India. They are teeming with wildlife, with the lowest rates of deforestation. We are holding on to our biodiversity. And we don't visualize either biodiversity or forests as large receptacles of or dustbins of carbon, which is generally a developed country view. And at the end, let me say that with so much of impacts in the world, what did the world do? We had conference after conference, sermons after sermons. But what India did? India stood up and established a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. India stood up and established the International Solar Alliance. India has now mooted for the Global Biofuel Alliance. So India has reassured the world that it will do whatever is possible for the world, because the world is but one family. India walks the talk on climate change, and when India speaks on climate change, it does so from a position of strength and responsibility. And as I said before, very quickly, 2 points. No single country in this world can solve this problem. It's a global collective action problem requiring reposing our faith in multilateralism and in the foundational principles of UNFCCC that we have all agreed. It is not just a 50, 100 or 500 meter race that run fast and win. It is marathon and much more and beyond, and everybody would need to cooperate. That is the message. But while you do that, please remember that the world needs empathy for all life forms on earth, and those who have used the resources disproportionately must come forward and share their experiences, their technologies, and their wherewithal with the rest of the world for the world to be a safer place to live. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatt. You very rightly raised some of those very relevant issues and a very candid presentation, I should say. Of course, you can do that. You can say that you have experienced all these things. But you very rightly said that whatever the advice the developed countries are now giving to the developing economies and developing world, had they followed even 10% of those advices, probably we wouldn't have come to this kind of a situation as we are facing now. But of course, well taken. There is always a solution to all the problems. I would now request Mr. Hirad Sabeti to present his views. He is, of course, as we know, he is the one of the founders and CEO of the Fourth Sector Group, which is very which is involved in finding solutions to some of the vexed problems. Of course, the financial, technological, technical and policy changes that are required as far as these issues are concerned. He is tackling some of those issues from the point of view of this Fourth Sector Group, and he has great experience in finding solutions for the problems arising out of the lopsided development, what we call the sustainable development now, which is the effect of lopsided development. I think one of those areas he has been working on. I would request Sabeti to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to echo the gratitude to RIS for bringing the LiFE economy to life, and all the incredible intellectual work and organizing work that's gone into making this happen. I really want to congratulate, I'm getting nostalgic. It's 2 days to the end of the Indian G20 presidency, and it's been such an incredible, momentous year, I think. with truly life-changing outcomes going forward. I feel like I'm thinking about these three elephants that we saw at one of the many events earlier in the year. And it made me think about the journey that this G20 has sort of been. It's one very remarkable thing about this year is that the world, with much thanks to the Indian G20 presidency, has reached what I'll call the 55-minute mark on solving the poly crisis. So Einstein, they asked him how long would it, they asked him if you had an hour to solve the world's problems, what would you do? And he said something like, I'll take 55 minutes to understand the problem and 5 minutes to work on the solution. So I feel like we've reached the 55-minute mark on climate change, on biodiversity loss, on inequality, on broken healthcare, on broken education, on social fragmentation, et cetera. Because we've acknowledged, as the Varanasi principles do, that climate and all these other issues, the SDGs are inseparable problems. They're an integrated whole. So that is an elephant that's been in the room forever in these kinds of conversations and not been acknowledged. We keep talking about the symptoms. Climate change is not a problem. Inequality is not a problem. These are symptoms. The problem is the underlying economic paradigm all of us inherited from a few centuries ago that's designed to make humans into resources and nature into resources. That's the economic system that then causes outcomes we don't necessarily like and lots that we do like. So it's not all bad. In fact, there's a lot of good to it. But it's not perfect and it's not fit for service going forward. So I think that's significant. The acknowledgement that the nature of the problems is that they are inseparable. You cannot solve one SDG without solving all SDGs. The second elephant that's always been in the room that doesn't get acknowledged is that what we've been doing to solve all these problems is never gonna work. The solutions we've been pursuing are not gonna work. The problems are getting bigger at a faster scale and ever accelerating pace towards oblivion, and incremental solutions that make us feel good for a minute, and then we go to the next one, and all these commitments that never follow through on, that the way we've been trying to solve problems is not gonna work. That's the other thing I feel like was acknowledged this year. And that's really important. The third elephant is an elephant that all of us have been basically, you know, the metaphor of the blind man and the elephant in the dark, right? So all of us have had our hands on some part of an elephant. Every one of the G20 countries has passed laws, many in the last 5 years, that recognize some new way, some piece of the life economy paradigm, some way of combining the logic of business and markets with the empathy that Batji was talking about. A widened circle of empathy for other people and the planet. What does that look like if you bring it together with markets and enterprise and economy? That is the life economy. And, you know, every country in the G20 has passed some kind of law, many of them fairly recently, that recognizes some sliver of that space. We enable social enterprise, or impact investing, or common good corporations, or public benefit corporations. There's all these movements: donut economics, circular economy, blue economy, impact economy, green economy, bioeconomy, alternatives to capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, inclusive capitalism. There's all these things. We all have our hands on some part of something we know is bigger than the part we're touching, but we don't quite have a sense of what it is when the lights are turned on. And none of us will until we look through all of our collective eyes, because each of us is seeing some hint of something emergent. So this process of getting from feeling, recognizing that what we've been doing is no longer going to work, that there's something over the horizon that we each have a sense of, a taste of, that we will never understand or get to unless we figure out how to look through each other's eyes, that collective sense-making, and then collective action, because it's not going to come into being. This little baby elephant that we all are touching needs nourishment. If the next paradigm is to take root and scale and save lives, save life, then it needs to be nourished. It needs to be recognized, needs to be seen. The whole thing needs to be seen. You can't nourish an emergent paradigm or organization or organism without knowing what its needs are. So I'm really happy that the next big step out of this summit, as we enter Brazil's G20 presidency, is that LiFE, which started as a seed into the G20 presidency of India, under, within the theme, and I've heard Enam Gambhir, who's joint secretary, who's the DWG co-chair, that birthed the Varanasi principles. She said, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, oneness is not a slogan, it's a strategy. The fact that the overarching or the underlying strategy within which, on top of which we're delivering this transition to a new paradigm is about oneness, roots it in exactly the ethical, the values, the intellectual base that you need to actually accomplish it. That's why we cannot see it unless we look through all of our eyes. That is oneness. Can't see it. So I think that's just been remarkable to have that as the bedrock on which all these conversations have been happening, and the evolution from we got to change our lifestyles to we got to change the whole system, because lifestyles is just one piece of a solution. If we just said the solutions are all integral, the problems are all integral, the solutions can't just be go change your lifestyles and everything's going to be okay. We have to enable those lifestyles by dealing with the whole rest of the system. Rethink finance, rethink metrics, rethink business, rethink production, consumption, every aspect of the economy. The economy is the system that we all collaborate in to take care of our collective needs and lives. That whole thing, a new one is emerging, and we need to recognize it, we got to figure out how to nourish it and help it scale. And that is the work I feel like is going forward now. It has been hatched out of the Indian presidency. Hopefully all of us and many others will now recognize this hatchling of the future we want and figure out how we want to orient ourselves towards it, help nourish it into being. And hopefully the Brazilian presidency, and I think with Gallery, the first task is insight. How do we see what this thing is, right? So a mapping, a sense-making exercise of think tanks, of doers, not just the thinkers, of everybody across the G20 and beyond to collectively try to sense make. So that's the first, I think, project that will be moving through Gallery. Delighted with all the partners that have come on board to move this thing forward, and welcome and invite all of you and everybody you know to also get involved in this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Abeti. Very rightly you have said. So that was a very good point that you raised, that we have already come to the 55-minute point. So that's really wonderful way of putting it. And of course, what you said about all of us know something about the problem. People who know something about the problem are no different from people who know nothing about the problem, because both can't provide a solution. So it's all the more important that we have to have some sort of a common platform. And that's exactly what we discussed when we started with the whole idea of this conference. After the G20, before the G20 also, there were a number of preparatory meetings, as far as many as 180 meetings, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Tadas, on the various aspects of G20. And also there was a constant coordination between not only Indonesia and India, but also between India and IPSA, because the immediate successor was, of course, Brazil, and then from Brazil it's going to go back to South Africa. So these three countries, India, Brazil, South Africa, form another forum called IPSA, which is also a very important forum looking at all these issues from not only from the three continents that they represent, not only from the point of view of these three continents, but also from the point of view of the global issues that are emerging. So in fact, India, especially IPSA, we have had a number of rounds on behalf of IPSA from the RIS. Very incidentally, the RAS has also have what we call the Blue Economy Forum, and we also have what we have termed it as Asia-Africa Growth Corridor and IPSA. IPSA is an independent vertical on which RAS works. So we have been looking at these issues from a very with a very fine tooth comb and getting into some of the solution part of it also. So we have been engaging with all these issues. So when it was all during the run-up to G20, these issues came up. So this idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which you mentioned, as not merely a slogan but as a strategy, as a tool to approach the problem. Because if you look at the, I mean, it's a long Sanskrit verse which says, I am nija paroveti gananam laguchetasam udara charitanam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. That is the whole sentence. So it's only people with a very small mind, with a very narrow outlook would say, me, myself, I, me, myself. People with a large heart and a broad outlook towards the world will always say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the entire world is one family. So it all began with that idea of looking at the world as one family, and that was the message that India wanted to give as far as G20 is concerned. So from that flowed a number of issues, and then came this idea of LiFE. So LiFE, as you very rightly said, is not merely a slogan, but LiFE is one of the tools to approach this problem. That is how the RIS basically started working on some of these issues. But at the same time, when we discussed this issue with some of the important officers of the Ministry of External Affairs, the RIS functions directly under the Ministry of External Affairs. We are part and parcel of the Ministry of External Affairs. So we began to look at issues regarding bilateral and multilateral trade, basically. But then the other subjects kept on coming into. So geopolitics is not just politics, but it is also something to do with international trade and also other issues that arise out of international trade. So with that, the G20 Secretariat had to someday or the other wind up. But then G20 was not to end with this, because G20 was also part and parcel of a larger issue of SDGs. As you very rightly said, SDG is also, I mean, there was some problem. I mean, no country could meet the targets of MDG. That's why the SDGs. And now we have got just 6 more years left to achieve the targets of SDGs also. So I'm not being pessimistic, but it's, I mean, let us be realistic. Realistically speaking, we are not, no country in the world is really going to come up with a solution for all the 17 issues that the SDGs are looking at. Probably sometime around 2027, 28, we will all have to take a call on what to do with the SDG, how to extend it, whether to extend it or not. So if you have to extend it, it could be probably a merger of SDG with the idea of LiFE. So something of that nature we will have to do. Can we merge it? And if the merger has to take place, we'll have to define all these issues in a very broader manner. So with that idea, we thought of coming up with this conference, a global summit on LiFE economy. So we first discussed, of course, this issue, whether we should really call it LiFE economy or just global summit on LiFE. But then the most important element of LiFE is the change in lifestyle, which is not going to, which can come from oneself, from inward, and also it can be brought in as a policy framework. So not only the government of India or government of South Asia's South Asian countries, but the entire world will have to look at policy interventions that will make life possible. the idea of LiFE into action. So how to bring the idea of LiFE into action through policy interventions. And as the last session we discussed, the session immediately preceding this valedictory session, we discussed about ideas of economy. Is economy responsible for the present problems, or is economy going to be a solution for the present problems, is the question that we will all have to tackle. And if there has to be a new economic paradigm, what that new economic paradigm is going to be. Is it going to think something out of the box, something beyond production and consumption? Is it going to think in terms of sustainable production and just distribution? Or we are going to come out something with new. So this is for the economists in this gathering to think about. There are practical people, there are people who have worked at the grassroots level here. There are people who are conducting experiments on SDGs, like the Indian Research Institute, which is doing a monumental work in Chitrakoot area. There are people who are also thinking in terms of setting up, and they have already worked on these issues as far as LiFE is concerned, by setting up a global forum for tackling all these issues, something like a World SDG Forum. So many other issues are there. So RIS is at the same time tackling some of these issues also. And most importantly, we have another vertical called RIS Work Program on Sustainable Development Goals. So when we sat together with all these issues, our Director General, who is the moving spirit behind this conference, and who basically guided us on each and every issue regarding this conference. He has another very important issue today, so he is not with us right now. So at one stage we thought that probably it's too early, or we have so many other problems to tackle, so we would probably not do this conference now. But one very important member of our team, Mr. Tadas, who is here, he insisted that, look, trust me, let us make this conference happen. So the credit of this conference goes to that person, Mr. Tadas. We can say, he is the moving spirit behind it. At a time when we thought this is not going to happen, he said it will happen, and he has made it. So I will request Mr. Tadas. His last assignment was Executive Director of IDBI Bank, and he has also been on a number of committees of Reserve Bank of India, and he has also been on a number of committees of the Government of India, which looked at policy interventions as far as some of these sustainable development issues which we are talking about now is concerned. And he has had his experience as far as MDG versus inter-ministerial activities are also concerned. So he is quite experienced in these areas. And I think because of this experience, he said we will do it, and he has done it. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to Mr. Tadas. I'll request him to present a vote of thanks and also give his views. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for giving me credit. I don't know whether I deserve that or not, but I have done my best. And thank you, in fact, all the dignitaries who are present here. I must say that this is a galaxy, a combination of thinkers, policymakers, industry, the private sector, and the civil societies, the practitioners. So that sense, this has been a unique combination. It is not just the dignitaries who are economists, but generally the tendency is that economists dominate such conferences. But we have seen to it that it is a very diverse group who can bring in their rich experiences, because we don't need only thinkers. We need a combination of thinkers and policymakers and practitioners. By practitioners, I mean the civil societies, the grassroots level organizations, the industry, and of course those who are at the helm of the affairs in formulating policies and things like that. As the chair has mentioned, the RIS has been working deeply on the issue of LiFE since the beginning of the G20, deliberations when India took over the presidency in December last year. And that is when, we also came in contact with Mr. Hirad. He has been working on the fourth sector, promoting fourth sector for the last over 30 years. Then he said, since India is introducing the concept of LiFE, it has introduced the concept of LiFE and it is taking it forward in terms of formulating high-level principles. Why not do some global summit on this? So the idea was generated sometime in February itself, but somehow the organizing of this global conference summit has now been possible. At least I'm thankful that it is materialized now before the presidency is passed on to Brazil. And this has been such a rich experience for the last 3 days that I am sure that we have all learned everything from each other's thoughts, ideas, and experiences. This will go a long way in taking forward the concept of LiFE economy. In fact, as the chair again said, that the India contributed LiFE, RIS and Hirad together contributed LiFE economy as a concept. But I know that I heard the discussions very carefully. Of course, there is recognition, as you all know, that the existing paradigms have not been able to deliver what is expected of well-being of humanity, of climate action, of biodiversity, and so on and so forth, even local governments, local participation, and things like that. So if the existing models have not been able to deliberate, it is time that we think of new paradigm. And we thought that LiFE economy could be one such new paradigm, but there are different interpretations of LiFE economy. It's not easy to arrive at one single accepted concept of LiFE economy, because LiFE economy means everything which pertains to life. I would not restrict it to lifestyle for environment. That's how the LiFE is written here. But I would just take it as normal, the way we use life, everyday life. So life is about everything. So we cannot ignore anything which pertains to life. But any economic activity should be such that it should support sustainable life, sustainable lifestyles, sustainable production processes. This is what we thought that we should be working to promote this cause, and that's how we are all here together. I think I'm not here to summarize what happened in the last 2-3 days, because this has been done by Nicholas in the beginning itself. I would only urge, if chair permits, 5 minutes. I know as an organizing institution, I know the time constraint. If the chair permits 5 minutes, we have facilitators who have been instrumental in structuring the action labs and all. If you can give them 5 minutes after me, they can explain that, but you should not exceed 5-minute limits. That's what my request is about. No, the most august duty, I think, is I should extend a vote of thanks to all of you, to the chair, Dr. Sheshadri, who has been guiding light for RIS for all its academic. He is a member of governing council of RIS. Mr. Michael Schiffer, the U.S. Assistant Administrator, who was very kind enough to join us in the Valedictory despite his very busy schedule. Thank you very much, sir. You have been able to make it here. And of course, Mr. Andreas, the OECD Sherpa. I would say that the OECD has been so much helpful to us. When we had gone to Paris, we had an event in OECD office. We had discussion with Federico, Mr. Rolf, and UNDP Development Division. And I'm so happy that you are able to make this year. And I'm also happy to say that OECD is a founding member of the gallery which we are launched. And we are going to have a very long-term collaboration with OECD. As you all know, that gallery, when we launched, there have been 6 founding members. And most of those representatives are here. Mr. Daniel is there. OECD, of course, is there. Then Khosrow Saab is here. We have luminaries, and the Impact Hub, of course, representatives, the very young group is here. I would thank all of you for making it possible, and then I would thank Government of India, Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Environmental and Forests, and the Indonesian government, which agreed to be co-host of this summit. And of course, the partners, I am grateful that they have been able to partner with us. You have seen the names of the partners in our the backdrop and all. I would not like to admit, but I would only express my sincere thanks to all of them. And I must say that this summit is organized within a very short notice of about less than a month, I would say. And you have all responded to requests. You have been able to make it from across the world. Otherwise, this would not have been possible at all. So I would thank all of you very sincerely that you have been here.
You want to present now?
Last but not the least, RIS team has worked 24/7 for the last 1 month. And I would like to, whole of RIS team is there in any case, but last but not least, Sukrut and Arpit, 2 names I want to recognize. So thank you everybody.
This presentation, very brief. People won't blame you, but blame me for keeping them away from lunch.
You can blame me, it's okay. Right. It's going to be very quick, I promise. Right, so first of all, we want to thank everybody for engaging with the labs. It was really important to have your collaboration on this, and you really rocked the boat. So thank you so much for that. And we have just a few key points harvesting the labs, the 3 labs, the 5 labs that we had now in Wave 3, just so you know what came out of it. Starting with measurement and new paradigm. What came out of this specific lab in terms of action was developing a participatory and human-centered approach for measurement to include unheard voices. And the next step from the groups that were working on this specific action is to create a working group that harness existing data and establish new data sources and measurements, including those unheard voices.
So for policy and regulation, we have bring people together, use R&D and civil society knowledge to create policies with clear accountability for all levels of stakeholders, using best practices from different countries, aggregated data, penalties, pledges, and etc. Next steps, develop an advocacy strategy to advance.
On sustainable finance, we have the group that was working on influence the 16th Finance Commission and Niti Ayong to prepare terms of reference to finance life economy initiatives, and they were going to create a forum to advance this agenda with the specific champions that were working in this specific action, also developing a shared data set, and there was a discussion if Gallery could support this initiative.
For understanding and mapping the life economy, the reflection was that we need to document best practices, map life economy with a consortium of stakeholders. As the next steps, advance and mindset shift for life economy, integrate local customs, norms and traditions, and work on the definition of the life economy.
On the final lab on governance, collaboration, engagement, we have embedding traditional knowledge into today's practices, putting people and communities at the center. Next steps is a working group focused on digital ethnography, synthesizing traditional knowledge, and then applying those. Cutting across all the labs, it was a call to action to really engage and keep collaborating, creating working groups. We have the harvesting of all the sessions in the QR codes that are out there in the cafe area. You will also receive at the end of the conference a link to access the harvesting again if you haven't received them yet, if you don't have an access yet. And if you are one of the champions of those actions, and you made it clear to your facilitators and your rapporteurs that were working with you in your sessions, we are going to facilitate a matchmaking so you can continue collaborating and working together on these actions. I'm going to ask the team to put the QR code on the screen if possible. So if possible, we would love to ask you to provide your feedback. If you really enjoy the format, if you like to have more conversations such as this, please give us your feedback so we know. If we cannot put the QR code on screen, it's fine, team. We can send them. We can send through email to you all afterwards. Thank you so much, and congratulations to RIS.
Thank you.
They have done a great job.
Yes.
I think we must thank the facilitator.
Yes, great.
Yes, thank you.
Gratitude to
Wonderful.
the Impact Hubs team for all their excellent work.
And one final word, all this will be on the RIS website also. We'll be creating an independent vertical as far as this particular meeting is concerned, and everything will be there, and we can have a constant interaction as far as this issue is concerned. Thanks once again for all of us, and we'll now move towards lunch. Thank you.
Lunch is in the adjoining lobby.
Good. Oh, yeah. Mr. Sabeti, please join us. The others have left. Come, Mr. Tadas. Just. That's all right.
Great job, all the best. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.